Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Heidi Sue, Assistant Vice President for National Engagement at the American Council on Education, and I am delighted to welcome you to the fourth event in our Building Pathways series. It's state-led strategies for student success and workforce pathways. For those who are joining us for the first time, ACE serves as the major coordinating body for the nation's colleges and universities. Our membership includes nearly 1,600 institutions, related associations, and other organizations in the U.S. and abroad. We are the only major higher ed association to represent all types of U.S. accredited degree-granting colleges and universities, which grounds our work in a united vision for higher education. I want to thank Imaginable Futures, whose generous support makes Building Pathways possible. This initiative amplifies state-led innovations that strengthen the connections between student access, higher education, and growing communities. Over the past several months, we've traveled to Richmond, Virginia, Kalamazoo, Michigan, and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, bringing together state leaders, employers, students, nonprofit organizations, and our greater community of 2-year, 4-year public and private higher ed institutions to share strategies, surface challenges, and strengthen ecosystems that support pathways to opportunity. We focused on student populations that bring extraordinary strength to our campuses and communities, yet navigate complex responsibilities in addition to their educational goals. Students that are first generation, military connected, parenting, and adult learners, oftentimes representing more than one of those categories simultaneously. Today's conversation is particularly exciting because we are showcasing innovative state partnerships that are working at a system level to actively remove barriers and create new statewide pathways to success. Our speakers are the leaders and drivers of this work. The takeaway from today's webinar is to demonstrate that these state leaders have developed proven models for growing strategies in other states and advancing national practices. Before I turn this over to my colleague, Elisa Gonzalez, I wanted to preview how you can continue today's conversation. On Tuesday, May 26th, ACE is hosting an in-person summit at Virginia Tech's Innovation Campus. It'll be an opportunity to draw lessons from across this series of state engagements and engage with your colleagues, and I hope you'll join us. Details will be available later through ACE's newsletter and channels. And now it is my pleasure to turn this to Elisa Gonzalez, my wonderful colleague and ACE's Government Relations Associate, who will introduce our opening speaker. Elisa?
Thank you, Heidi. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you and to introduce our opening speaker, Rebecca Lee. Rebecca is a second-year law student at Syracuse University College of Law and a commissioned U.S. Army officer. As the president of the Military and Veterans Law Society and a student attorney at the Veterans Legal Clinic, she is leading advocate for the military-connected community, specializing in disability claims and national security law. Rebecca also serves as the president of the Military and Veterans Law Society at Syracuse University and has, through this role, represented the College of Law at a variety of national events focused on veteran and military-affiliated students. She is an associate editor for the Syracuse Journal of International Law and Commerce, blending her background in international relations with a career dedicated to bridging the gap between military service and the legal profession. We are so excited to have her here, and I'll turn it over to Rebecca to really ground this conversation for us.
Eliza, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to ACE for bringing me on to today's webinar to share a little bit about my experience as a current military and military-connected student. So like Eliza mentioned, I attended Syracuse University for my undergrad, where I did ROTC there, and this was my first introduction to the veteran advocacy space, primarily through the work of the Office of Veteran Military Affairs. And this work took this form of sponsorships and scholarships, as well as support for military-connected students and veterans. I followed up my undergrad by attending Syracuse Law on a Army legal education delay. And this is where I really began integrating myself into that veteran advocacy space, in particular, working with student veterans in the Military and Veterans Law Society, as well as other student organizations on campus, like our student veteran organization. Now, my biggest takeaway from these numerous conversations that I've had over the course of the past several years was that the challenges to military connected and student veterans face is a lack of resources and or a lack of knowledge of what resources they even have. Now, much of my background and understanding comes from my own personal experiences, observing my friends and peers undergo these challenges, and also learning by observation and conversation at the Student Veterans of America's National Conference in Colorado Springs this year. Now, in particular, students looking to join the military, coming from a civilian perspective into the military, we have state National Guards that make up a decent portion of our current ROTC population. And for these students, their scholarships and their funding generally comes from the federal government, but some of that sustainment also comes from our National Guard systems and state funding. Now, since I started ROTC in 2020 and ended in 2024, more and more students had come through the program and seeking National Guard scholarships, also known as Minuteman scholarships. But each year, the amount of Minuteman scholarships and federal funded scholarships decrease. And while Syracuse is one of the more well-funded programs in the country, we have faced a slight decrease in our enrollment, but also if we are experiencing that issue, other programs are also facing this issue at a much greater degree, and especially with the consolidation of ROTC programs across the nation, this also becomes an issue on the funding front. But military connected students face unique dilemmas in which they're unaware of many of the resources that might be available to them. And this begins and in part takes up a part of that conversation, the differing definitions beginning at that university level. And as a result, universities aren't actually able to adequately identify who and who isn't military connected. And this leads to students missing scholarship opportunities, financial aid, organizational involvement, and overall access to certain spaces because they feel as though they are unable to engage. On the other hand, you have veteran students who often face difficulty in integrating into civilian spaces. And in particular, academic spaces, this can become even more difficult because on top of managing grades, they're trying to reintegrate and reintroduce themselves into an environment that they had left long ago. And they, at the same time, they're trying to secure jobs and internships. And on top of that, having to balance often family obligations or even commuting or feeling isolated from their peers. As a result, there's a need for social support communities or other student veteran organizations that serve as a platform for creating that sense of belonging and community where students are able to come and share their experiences in the military and really bond over them. But also they serve the important role of being able to work out some of those information gaps related to benefits of their own. And so what these communities don't do, they don't provide updates to system procedures. They don't create a space where they allow veterans to advocate for themselves in spaces where they're not necessarily understood. But in particular, in its totality, student veterans have little to no advocates in faculty spaces for students to turn to, which impacts student performance and a sense of belonging. But it also does not allow them to often transfer some of the credits they earned during their military service because universities don't adequately understand how it comports to offered courses and how it ordinarily fulfill credit requirements. And so military connected individuals and veteran students often have resources presented to them and offered to them, but the lack of communication between universities and students often creates a barrier and a bridge that creates a great gap where students are unable to effectively engage with the system and really take up all that the university has to offer. And so from the university down, having and increasing that communication will better allow students to remain engaged with the university. But today's presentations outline these issues quite well, and they identify how systems can change to better suit the needs of our military connected and veteran students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing your expertise and really helping us understand what this conversation today will be focused around. What you just shared really grounds this conversation and what these systems look like from the student perspective as a military connected student day to day. From here, we're going to zoom out a little bit and look at how institutions and states are responding to those realities, and where there's still work to do. We're joined by three speakers who each bring a different lens to that work and are representing various states and the national perspective. First, we will hear from Bradley Wren, who joins us from the University of North Carolina system, where he focuses on how systems implement and scale supports for military affiliated students across campuses. His work is closely tied to how institutions coordinate across programs, policies, and partnerships to better serve students navigating complex pathways. After Bradley, we will hear from Dr. Teresa Anderson, who is a senior fellow at the Urban Institute and co-leads the Spark Collaborative, bringing a research perspective on how different student populations experience these systems and what that means for policy and design. Her work helps translate data into actionable insights that can inform more responsible and inclusive approaches across higher ed and workforce systems. And lastly, we will hear from Dr. Jim Purcell, who is the Executive Director for the Alabama Commission on Higher Education, where he's leading statewide efforts to align education and workforce strategy, including through the Success Plus initiative. He has led similar efforts in multiple states and brings a deep understanding of what it takes to drive sustained system level change for students. So let me hand it over to Bradley to get us started and hear from his great expertise. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here and for allowing me the opportunity to join you and to share some of the work that we're doing here in the UNC system. Just to make sure, can somebody give me a thumbs up that they're seeing my shared screen? All right, folks. So my name is Bradley Wren, and I work for the UNC System Office. So that's the governing body for all of the 16 public universities in North Carolina. And my job is specifically related to military affiliated student success. So we're going to go through a couple of different ways that we do the work that we do on our team and some of the things that we do and some of the initiatives and partnerships that we've built over the past several years to basically address and mitigate all of those challenges that Rebecca mentioned in her presentation, because they are all very real and they are not state specific. Those are all issues that I have heard from our student veterans. I am myself a three-time student veteran of the UNC System Office. And I can attest to personally the same sorts of challenges and issues that she mentioned. So let's jump right into this. We have fortunately seen an uptick in our military affiliated student enrollments as of fall 2025, and this is post grades numbers. So not so we know these folks were here because this was counted after the semester was over. We're at roughly 23.2 thousand military affiliated students system wide. And that's a pretty big increase from just, fall 2020. And we are currently on track to meet our strategic goal metric for student enrollment, because military student enrollment is not only a success metric for our team, but it is one of the success metrics by which the UNC System Office as a whole measures its success. So when we talk about military affiliated students, who are we talking about? Because that question has not always been the same from institution to institution, even within a particular state, even within a particular system. We codified the definitions of a military student and a military affiliated student in 2022. And so when we're talking about military affiliated students as a whole, we are talking about active duty folks, National Guard and Reserve personnel, veterans, spouses, dependents, and ROTC cadets. Uh, the the term military student that we use refers to active duty, National Guard and Reserve personnel, and veterans. And so that is a definition that all 16 of our institutions use when we're calculating student success metrics like retention, persistence, graduation, and post-graduation employment. And it may seem like a trifling distinction, but it is in fact really an important distinction to make because of the fact that there are differences among these populations. And it is a mistake to homogenize this community of students into one group that has the same needs and the same issues and even the same goals and preferences. So if you look at benefits eligibility, there are different types of benefits that are eligible, that students are eligible for depending on their status as an active duty service member or a National Guard member. You're eligible for tuition assistance. National Guard members are eligible for both federal and state tuition assistance. All military students are eligible for GI Bill chapters. Also, some military affiliated students are eligible for GI Bill chapters, like the Chapter 35 DEA for spouses and children of disabled veterans, and transferred post 9/11 benefits. We have different levels of intent to enroll. And all of this is based on, what's on my slide here is based on actual research that we have done and that the folks at the Defense Manpower Data Center have done. And so we see very high intent to enroll for transitioning active duty. So folks who are coming off of active duty in the next few years have a very high intent to enroll. Same with National Guard, and a little bit lower with veterans. Learning preferences, active duty and spouses prefer online instruction, but veterans we've found by and large prefer face-to-face instruction. And then, of course, I mentioned our policies. We have a military student success policy that I'll talk about a little bit more in just a sec, but it includes provisions for both military students and for all military affiliated students. So what do we do? What do we do to make our system more military friendly? Well, so we really break it down into two fundamental buckets. One bucket is strategic partnerships, and that is making our constituent institutions into strategic partners with the system office. Like Rebecca said, making sure that there is consistent communication from the system office to the universities to the students. And then we also work with external agencies, veteran serving agencies, military family serving agencies, and the military installations themselves. In North Carolina, you have Fort Bragg, Camp Lejeune, MCAS Cherry Point, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, Coast Guard Base Elizabeth City, tons and tons of folks who are on active duty. And one of the paradigms that we have tried to shift is to look at higher education not in terms of a post-service idea, in that, you can come into the military and then when you get out, you can pursue higher education. That is not necessarily true anymore. Now you can pursue higher education and should pursue higher education while you are, in fact, enlisted or commissioned in the active duty military. The other side of that is policies that encourage applicants to choose our schools and help them meet those success metrics, those persistence rates, those retention rates, and graduation rates and post-graduation employment rates. Those are the two sort of broad strokes ways that we do the work that we do. So let's talk about one of those policies. The primary policy that we have to measure military affiliated student success is a policy and regulation 700.7.1, and that is our military student success regulation. And it basically dictates how our schools, all 16 of our institutions of higher learning, have to behave with regards to military and military affiliated students. They are rules that everyone has to abide by. And to give you an example of what I mean when I say that, in not the most recent iteration of this regulation, but the previous iteration of the regulation, for the first time, we system-wide eliminated application fees for veterans. Prior to that, it was only active duty service members who would receive an application fee waiver. Now, anyone who is a military student, so active duty, National Guard, Reserve, and veterans, all get application fee waivers. So if you are a veteran and you are on this call, you can apply to any of our schools free. The other thing that we did with this policy is we offer priority registration for anyone using the GI Bill or DoD or DHS tuition assistance. And this is one of those policies that is open to all military affiliated students who meet the criteria. Because if you are a service member, if you are a spouse, or if you are a dependent and you are using the GI Bill or TA, you get priority registration. You get your classes on day one. So you don't have to fight for those classes because the VA and the DoD will not pay for classes that aren't working towards your degree. And so then in the student focus space, we make sure that we have equity and consistency with regards to support and resources across the board for all of our students. So what does that look like? That is trainings for our faculty and staff to teach them what it means to be a service member or a military affiliated student. What is the military like? What are some myths about the military? What are the unique challenges that these folks face? What are some of the unique things that they bring to the table? And why we should be courting these students as applicants. We also host monthly meetings with folks on campus who work directly with the military affiliated students. All 16 of our campuses has a singular primary point of contact that is directly working with the students. Those 16 people and some of their partners that work at their campus, because not all of them only have one, we all meet monthly to share best practices and to make sure that we're all tracking changes in legislation and just to make sure that we're all providing that same level of support and resources regardless of the size and scope of our military affiliated student populations. We offer mental health first aid training and QPR suicide prevention training to all of our faculty and staff. We also provide it to students as well, particularly VA work studies and members of Student Veterans Association. Our goal is to have anybody and everybody at our universities who works in any way or any capacity with military affiliated students to be trained in either mental health first aid, QPR suicide prevention, or both. And going back to the faculty and staff training, we have another goal that everyone in our counseling centers who is tasked with the mental health of our students has that cultural competency training regarding military students so they know how to best serve that community. And then primarily with regards to VA and DoD and DHS benefits, we know that students often don't know how they work and don't know how to best optimize the use of those benefits. And so we have several mechanisms wherein we can help students make those determinations. One of those is a series of short 1-2 minute long videos that goes through each chapter of the GI Bill and lets you know very pertinent information that you need to know to make sure that you're using those benefits effectively. We have 2 websites. One is a partner website that is for our constituent institutions and those other agencies and institutions that I mentioned before. They can also access those Green Zone trainings, mental health first aid trainings, QPR trainings, and connect with us. But then we have a student portal as well, and the student portal's purpose is to minimize the number of clicks it takes for a student to get from, hey, I'm interested in going to a university in North Carolina, to I am filling out an application for a particular school in North Carolina. They can learn all about our programs. They can connect. There is contact information, phone numbers, and emails for real people who work with students who will answer the phone and talk to you, and it's listed on that website. And there are also some external supports and resources there available for students who may have emergency needs as well. And finally, one of the biggest projects that I've been working on recently is our military equivalency system. And that is a system whereby a student who has been in the military and has what's called a Joint Services Transcript that is developed by ACE, can upload that document into our system and get a readout of exactly the course credit that they should expect to receive from all 16 of our universities. We started out with about 5,000 equivalencies in that database, and we're currently up over 23,000. But that is not work that is done. That work is going to continue ad infinitum because there are always new jobs coming down the pike, and there will always be more equivalencies that we can add to that database. But currently, we're averaging about 16 credit hours per person who puts their joint services transcripts into that system. And that's it. That's what I've got. I'm sorry if I went over my time. This is my contact information. I'm sure that the slides will be made available to you after that. But if you would like to connect with our team, please feel free to do so.
Thank you so much, Bradley. And we're going to move on over to Teresa. So, Bradley, if you want to stop sharing your screen, and
Yep.
Teresa.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to stop share.
Thank you. And now Dr. Anderson will present. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for having me here today. I'm Teresa Anderson. As our wonderful hosts already did a great introduction, so I won't spend more time on that, except to say that I'm a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. And I'm just getting my slides up right here so that you all can see it. Great. So my role here is to connect the dots a bit and to talk a bit about today's students, because our fabulous previous presenters have talked a great deal about military connected and veteran students. And I want to share a bit about the bigger picture of our modern undergraduate population in higher education in the United States. So as we think about all undergrads at colleges, universities in the United States, there are over 17 million right now. And when we look at those veterans, which is a really critical population, and Bradley and Rebecca gave great insights into why this is a population that merits and has received a great deal of support. There's about 635,000 veterans. We also see that nationally, there are over 3 million students who are parenting or who have dependent children. And overall, there's almost 6 million adult learners, defined as folks who are 25 or older. And one thing that's useful as we look at these populations is to think about where there are places of overlap and where we can design in ways that are going to be beneficial not only to these groups, but also to other students who may face challenges or barriers in succeeding in meeting their education goals. And I'm going to talk specifically today more about parenting students. And I'm going to talk about that because as we think about veterans, which we've been talking about, 45% of veteran learners are parenting. And 48% of adult learners are parenting. And if in addition, parenting students, 3/4 of them are working an average of 36 hours per week while they're employed. So these are working students as well. 36 hours a week is full time. So these are very busy working students. And over half of them are at community and technical colleges. So there's a lot of design overlap in thinking about some of our priority populations as we're trying to create more access pathways and success pathways for students by thinking about parenting students as a design population. So I'm going to say just a bit about parenting students themselves, that supporting them can be a win all around. It's good for students, it's good for children and families, it's good for colleges, and it's good for taxpayers. Focusing on this population in itself even as when we do focus on, and I say focus, what I mean is when we're designing programs, policies, and systems, we're imagining a student in our head. And perhaps we can imagine a student who may be a veteran, who may be also parenting, who may be an adult learner, and that's the student who's also working. And that's the student that you're designing for so that you can make everything more accessible and more available to folks across the spectrum. But that said, let me get into a bit about parenting students and why it can be a win to make sure that that parenting status is part of that design. First, who are parenting students? At public colleges nationally, nearly 1 in 5, 18% of students have a dependent child. And at community colleges, it's almost a quarter, it's 22%. This is, as I mentioned, over 3 million undergrads. And if we add in graduate students, that's another 1 million students. So over 4 million students with dependent children in not just public, but public and private institutions across the US. These are very strong students. Despite raising, having on average 2 dependent children, working, as I mentioned, over about 3/4 are working and going to school. They have similar or higher GPAs than non-parenting peers. So these are highly motivated students, but there's huge completion gap. So parenting students, only 17% complete a degree within 6 years, compared to about 50% of non-parenting students. And after you adjust for their demographic differences, they're 55% less likely to complete. So it's strong students who are not achieving their goals at the same level as others. But supporting student parents pays off. And I have this QR code here. I'm going to pull it up again at the end. There's a really nice 2-pager that kind of summarizes some of these insights that I think can be especially helpful as you're sort of understanding where this population focus can be valuable. So first, we can see payoffs for families. In particular, we have mothers. So I did my dissertation research on moms who go back to school. And I looked at moms not because I don't value dads, but because the data source I looked at tracked children of women in the original survey. So I'm going to look at mothers and I'm going to look at their children to see what happens when moms go back to school. Mothers who re-enroll in school see in the long term earnings gains of about $3,000 a year, just under $3,000 a year in 2026 dollars. That's just from re-enrolling on average. But when they complete a degree, it's over 3 times higher. It's about $9,500 a year on average earnings gains from completing that college degree when they didn't have one before. And if we look at children of those mothers who complete their college degree, they see payoffs not only in the short term, they see gains in reading and verbal scores right away, but they also see longer term education and workforce payoffs. So they're 9% more likely to complete high school, 21% more likely to enroll in college, and 38% more likely to get a college degree. And on average, these children were about 29 years old on average at the end of this period that I was looking at them. Even in that early adulthood period, they were earning more too, $5,700 average earnings gains per year in early adulthood. So we see this paying off for individuals, for their children, for families. We also see payoffs for colleges. Nationally, there are nearly 31 million parents of minor children without a college degree who are not currently enrolled in school, and more than 1 in 3 have some college experience. I don't expect you to squint at this map, though this is the thousands of parents without a college degree by state, but if you do go to that QR code, which I'll pull up again, you'll be able to look at it more closely. But this is an important recruitment population. This is thinking about parents who don't have a college degree and making education a pathway that is feasible and accessible to them is one major response to the current enrollment crisis that many colleges are facing. We also see a payoff for taxpayers. So we did a return on investment analysis looking at the returns to taxpayers only in higher taxes and lower benefit receipt. We wanted to make sure nobody thought we were sort of cooking the numbers, so it's very conservative. This is just these outcomes, and it looks at 3 interventions. Targeted supportive programming at public colleges for parenting students would pay for itself $5.36 per dollar spent. A $3,000 annual scholarship would pay for itself $1.73. And affordable on-campus childcare, which is expensive, I'm not going to lie, but even that pays for itself $1.24 per dollar spent because it yields the largest increase in graduates. It's from the best research we have to date, and we still want to improve that research base, it's highly effective. And as I said, this doesn't even count all the personal benefits to students and families or broader benefits to communities. And I will say, if you want to tell an investor that they can get a payoff of $5.36 for a dollar spent, that's a pretty darn good one. I think most people would take that bet. And also note that the targeted supportive programming that we talked about here, a lot of it could look like some of the great programming that Bradley brought up, that they're doing, for example, in the UNC system and that other colleges are offering to military involved students. If we can extend that beyond the military and service members to not only benefit parenting students, but perhaps become available to the broader student population, again, with that design thinking, we can potentially see these big payoffs rippling across colleges in really meaningful ways as well, beyond the specific populations that they were that were eligible for them. Excuse me. There's that QR code again that I mentioned. This is a nice little 2-pager that can kind of share these connection points, and that's on our Spark collaborative page, which Heidi mentioned at the beginning. Spark is a student parent action through research knowledge collaborative. It's a cross-organizational effort to be able to understand and support opportunities for parents in higher education based in research data and evidence. So I'm just going to close with saying that designing for today's students will help get tomorrow's best outcomes. And perhaps it's a little cliche, but I really believe it to be true. So we're designing for the parents, for the workers, for the adults, for the veterans or military connected students. Of course, it's not just design. You have to deliver effectively. Lots of things get lost between design and implementation, but if we can manage to make this all work well, we're going to see a brighter future for not only individuals, families, but also colleges, for communities, and for the economy more broadly, which I'm very grateful for my next presenter to talk about a bit more. But with that, I just want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to share these slides, and I am always available for questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Teresa. And now we're going to move forward to Dr. Jim Purcell for his presentation.
No. Well, I think the big thing is what everybody has said so far is that we're helping people succeed. Alabama has an initiative called Success Plus. It's really designed to understand what the needs of our businesses are. It's for all adults. It's for military people coming back. It's just helping people with the American dream when they need to help the most. The surprising thing when we made our targets was that we found out that most of our needs in the job market was actually at the university degree level, 2/3 versus 1/3 at the community colleges. And this really helped change our strategy about what matters. So one of our goals was just to get more than 500,000 people with post-secondary credentials in our workforce. And so what we had to do is increase our graduation rate, get more people involved in college, and actually the goal for that was to have more people actually participate in working than we had in the past. One of the admissions was direct admissions, helping match the career interest of the students, both in high school and beyond, so that we could speed up that process. We have several initiatives out there. One is a FAFSA completion project to make sure there's aid. Retain Alabama, which is designed to sort of understand why students leave the state or stay in the state. Re-engage Alabama, which is scholarships for adults. And then Recall Alabama, which is actually to request some to come back because our economy is so robust. The key to keep in mind for us is that the local needs are very different. And what you're seeing on this graphic is all these little bubbles represent 100,000 people in America at different places. And you can sort of there's a continuum of these populations and those that live in situations where there's low levels of education and there's low work conditions. And then over time, they can, if you work on build that economy and you have higher level of education, you have greater economic success, prosperity, things of that nature. So that's a way to do it. And in Alabama, this is where we look compared to the rest of the country. So we can identify places that we think need help. What we've done is break them down into workforce regions, which allows us to zone in on local needs and the local needs for the community, the adult military bases nearby, to make sure that we're putting in the right interventions to optimize success. And this can be very different by state, and we'll show you examples here. This is Georgia. One second here. There we go. That's Alabama. Notice we're sort of all toward the left. Then Georgia has a large number of population centers that are actually doing quite well. But what can we do with some of these that are trailing a bit? Here's New Hampshire. It's like Lake Wobegon moved from Minnesota to New Hampshire. Everybody is in the right place at the right time. And then you can do this in local communities. This is District of Columbia. And you can sort of see that all the politicians and the high-powered smart people that run our country live in certain parts of that city. And then there's just one area where there's a lot of struggling individuals. How do we help them become successful? And you can sort of see that states can have maybe nothing in common in their economy. Nebraska, very well educated for an agricultural state, whereas Alaska gets a lot of money out of the ground and everybody gets a little money. So they seem to sustain themselves without reference to credentials at all. So all of this helps us build a plan that helps everybody have access to the American dream. And with that, I look forward to conversations that all of us will have with the panelists.
Thanks so much, Jim. And I think we're going to be joined by our other speakers now. Fantastic. Thank you each for these presentations. And just for the audience, a lot of resources were shared. And so for our attendees, we will be updating the event site and include the PowerPoint presentations as well as the links that have been shared, because there's a lot of good information here. So Jim, Bradley, and Teresa, maybe we start with you. I think the sort of goal behind ACE's Building Pathways initiative is to spotlight the value and potential for state policies to be driving national impact. And Jim, I love that you talked about how local needs are very different. And I'd argue that state policies are really important to see and understand. These policies are nimble, they're proximate to the people, and they can serve as models for other states. So I would ask each of you, for other states that are focused similarly on advancing student access to higher education, what is the one model that you would lift up? And it doesn't have to be from your state, but of course, everybody's going to be a little biased here. What would one model be that you would lift up that you would want them to consider? And Jim, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, well, I think the big one is connected to the economy. Politically, that's really where you can get greater support, sort of see what the needs of the local communities are, and then advocate for funding and support for adults, for people returning, so that we're sort of addressing the economic needs, the workforce needs of a community, as well as helping the individuals. I enjoyed Rebecca's presentation because you could sort of feel throughout that presentation how the system really worked to help her become successful and how she became a part of that. So I think that, to me, that's important. You have to have people that are willing to do outreach. In Alabama, we have a group called Alabama Possible that provides support for students as they try to transition back into college and for people right out of high school. So I think those kind of organizations are important. So it does take a village, as one liberal politician said at one point.
And just a quick follow-up on that, because I know Bradley had flagged and emphasized through his presentation the importance of communication. So Jim, from your perspective, when you talk about the communication, what is populating your communication? How are you making the argument to the different communities and partners that you're working with? And I think you mentioned workforce and these sort of economic numbers. How are you packaging that to them strategically?
Yeah, and I think it's multiple prongs. One is, do we do direct communications? We have access to all the high school seniors. We can communicate to them. We actually gathered a mailing list of everybody that had some college, no degree, so we can directly communicate to those individuals by regions to say, here are some opportunities at the colleges, and here are some job openings that we have. So a lot of it's direct. I mean, to me, a lot of the big solutions for addressing the social issues in this country were handled in the 60s and 70s, and they overspent like crazy. And but nowadays we don't have those resources. So what we have to do is do hocus pocus with the focus, analyze what the needs are, and target those specifically. And I think it does require a local conversation, really understanding the needs. Sort of Teresa outlined the social issues that are out there, and we just have to understand that context in addition to just what the data says.
And Bradley, what would you lift up?
So there's a couple of things that I would say. One is if you are part of another state system, one thing that is really a must-have is a primary point of contact for military and military affiliated students on all of your campuses. That person does not have to have all of the answers, but somebody at your school or in your system does have those answers. And my experience as a student veteran and the experiences of the student veterans that I've worked with is that what they want is someone to answer their phone call and direct them to a person who can answer their question if that person cannot answer it themselves. So I would say having a person that is specifically dedicated to the support of military affiliated students, if possible, having a place on your campus for those students to convene because like Rebecca said, it is very difficult. Most of these folks are non-traditional aged. They are most often living off campus. They have less time for co-curricular activities. And so having a place for them to come and be their authentic selves and to seek support in kind of a one-stop shop model is really, really, really critical. Uh, the other thing that I would say, just from a workforce development point of view, is a lot of times when we talk about military students, particularly student veterans, there's a deficit perspective when we talk about these students, right? Like, how do we help these students? What can we do for these students to help them along, right? And that's fair, and it's absolutely something that is necessary and worthy to be talked about. But the converse of that is also true. These are very high performing students. These are students who are coming into your schools with baked in skills and traits that civilian students don't typically have. Discipline, work ethic, time management, stress management, all of these things, effective teamwork skill. I mean, I could go on and on. The other thing is, if you look at data from the Defense Manpower Data Center about the top demand majors for folks who are leaving the military within the next 5 years, you will see that those top majors align directly with critical workforce needs. In North Carolina, I know, but I'm sure that those critical workforce needs track beyond North Carolina. Things like healthcare and health sciences, nursing, business, logistics, supply chain management, education. All of these things are both critical workforce areas in terms of need for our states, and they are areas that these students want to study. And so that to me is a perfect reason to do everything that you can do as a school and as a system to court military students and military affiliated students as applicants.
And Teresa, would love to hear your perspective here, especially as a researcher and somebody with a national eye.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Heidi, and thank you to Jim and Bradley for your comments. I will say that I think everything that Bradley is saying about military students, you could just put parenting students in place of military, and I would say the exact same thing, right? There is a really great Department of Education initiative called the Eight Keys to Veteran Success. And there's an opportunity for institutions to sign on that they're going to adopt these 8 keys. And I've said for a long time that, man, we could do the same thing for parenting student success. We could do, there's a couple of other key populations we could think about. I will say, though, to your question, Heidi, about state policy, something that's been really important and Dr. Purcell mentioned this as well, is the data and being able to make the case, especially in your communications and bringing business partners or economic development interests into the conversation. That's been a big gap in the parenting student space in particular. There's no standard item that tracks a student's parenting status federally, but 7 states now have passed legislation in just the last few years from a broad range of perspectives. States from Oregon to Texas have passed legislation to require public institutions to track students' parenting status as a social characteristic along with their demographics. Just as we track their military status, we might track their first-gen status and such. And that allows us to characterize the population, to track outcomes and speed bumps that they might hit along the way. The other thing that has illustrated in the states that have adopted it is just how many of those parenting students are in online programs. And Bradley mentioned this because a lot of military students also are not on campus and they're probably learning online or in virtual hybrid remote programs. And so I think that this is a new frontier still in the state policy space. I don't have the perfect example legislation, but thinking about where supports, policies, and opportunities that are equally available to online and remote learning students can be made available. I think that's an area that there's a lot of opportunity in.
And Rebecca, I think we would all benefit from hearing from your perspective on this. We've heard a lot about belonging, but just curious from the student perspective, what's kind of jumped out from the presentations that our colleagues have shared, and what's one support, formal or informal, that you would highlight here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Heidi. No, these presentations were great, and in its totality, it really hits the issues that are presented to us like on the head. Like in terms of formal structures, Bradley did discuss this in his presentation, and he just shared with us now, but having those people in your institutions that really take on this issue for themselves, like almost make it a personal matter, whether that be they see students struggling with this themselves or they have themselves experienced it. Like someone who is there to really advocate for these individuals and hear them out, really just sit with them and listen to what they're going through, but also taking it a step further to try and do something about it. Oftentimes, like students will express their concerns, but they're not met with anything from the institutional level. And so having faculty who are really there to really just be an advocate for them and try and make change for them within the institutional system really not just helps them feel more involved and like they're benefiting their community by voicing their concerns and not feeling like they're being silenced, but also on the other hand, it makes the university more attractive for veteran students to try and military students to try and really engage with them and enroll with them. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this communication between military individuals is not happening on an advertisement level. A lot of it is happening on a by like a word by mouth kind of level and communicating, hey, these people really helped me do X, Y, and Z. And the list goes on and on. But that word of mouth communication and having that reputable stance from the very beginning often helps more students and really try and engage and enroll with these programs and really connect with the communities present. And so Syracuse does try and do this, and they've become very successful at it. And we've been helping a lot of our publicly funded university counterparts to do this similarly. Like we've been in close communication with different like HBCUs and different universities on different state levels, but trying to replicate some sort of structure, a formal structure within the institution really helps. Like Bradley's UNC program, like stuff like that. It just really helps bolster that military community, and having those faculty in place really to just help them through the process, but also fill in the gaps where there may not be as much support from, like, for example, like understanding their benefits and like GI Bill, that can get really confusing. VR&E, even more confusing. But having those people who are able to kind of discuss and walk through those complications and things that arise with those programs, it really does help make the veteran student more inclined to remain engaged.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I mean, it's wonderful to hear the success stories here. Bradley and Jim, you're achieving results with the work that you're doing, but maybe we pivot a little bit and sort of pick up something Rebecca said. What are the challenges here at the state level? Sort of what would you pinpoint as the challenge that you've experienced that you would want to sort of share with colleagues here from other states? And how are you able to overcome those?
Well, I'd just say for us, I think it is communications, and technology has helped. We've been able to communicate directly to individuals, by collecting their information, because it is an audience out there that's not there. So to me, communications is key, using technology where you can, and then providing enough resources for the local colleges to do what they need to do.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, at the end of the day, funding is what matters. You've got to invest in the folks on your campuses who work with military students and put the systems and processes in place to best serve those students. It has to happen. Another thing, and I would be remiss if I did not speak at least briefly about our partnership with ACE. One of the historical problems that we've seen is credit for prior learning for military training and experience. That is something that has been woefully underserved historically, nationwide. Um, and that was the impetus for our creation of our military equivalency system. And we now have a partnership with ACE wherein we share with them data on who we give credit for and what we give that credit, what kind of credit we give them. And they give us bulk access to all the data from the ACE military guide on learning outcomes and taxonomy codes related to the recommendations made for course credit for occupations and schoolhouse work in the military.
Great.
It is absolutely something that I mean, there are not a lot of programs like ours that exist, and if you really want to move the needle in terms of enticing students to come to your schools, that is probably the best way to move forward in that regard.
Thanks, Bradley. And if there are any questions from attendees, please feel free to add them to the chat. But before we go there, Rebecca and Teresa, we are running close on time, but I would just be curious to hear from your perspectives that sense of belonging, if we can pick up that theme again. So what do you think would be the main takeaway for how to create that sort of environment? And I know we talked about space on campus, but would be really interested in hearing your thoughts. And we'll go to one question in the chat after that.
I will say that I think the biggest thing, as I kind of mentioned in my presentation, is about who you're designing for as you're creating programs, activities. You perhaps maybe imagining a certain type of student. Perhaps they're residential on or near campus. Perhaps they're full-time. Perhaps they're young. Perhaps they're not, don't have as much, military or family responsibilities or work responsibilities. And to shift your thinking in to say, how would I design this event? How would I create opportunities for student activities? How would I train my faculty or provide information to folks if I'm actually imagining my adult military connected parenting working, perhaps primarily hybrid learning student, and make sure that student feels as invited and as included and designed for as any other on campus or off.
I really like what Teresa said, and kind of just piggybacking off of that and bringing it down to the student level, and its relationship with institutions, just investing in student leaders. Because at the end of the day, it's these student leaders that are going to be bringing these issues and problems up to the institutional level. It's going to be these student leaders who are sharing what they've learned and what resources, what's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them, to they're sharing with their peers. And oftentimes we have like students, people tend to group together. You impact one, you impact the rest. And so having that one person, and it doesn't have to be just one, and it doesn't even have to be a money investment. It could just be time, listening to them, meeting with them, but investing some form of time into these individuals and really bolstering their sense of, hey, I'm here for you. I'm here listening to you. What can we do? Opening that hand and reaching out sometimes is the most effective way to impact and bring together that community. And having that conversation up front is really critical in developing that sense of community on campuses and between students.
And I am sorry to say that we are at time, but Rebecca, that might have been the perfect way to conclude this conversation. Thank you so much. I just want to thank our attendees who participated today. We'll follow up on questions from the chat separately. And I just want to thank each of our speakers for sharing the benefit of their experience and strategies, and really appreciate all the time you took today. Thank you.